everyone, Mrs. Ortega here. We are going to take a look today at Chapter 8. So in Chapter 8, we'll look at unifying concepts of animal structure and function. Essentially, we're going to look at what all organisms, all animals in particular, are made up of, their organs, organ systems, tissues, and the sort. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So our introduction starts off with the question, does evolution lead to the perfect animal form? Now, if you remember from our evolutionary chapters in the beginning of the semester, you would automatically say no. Evolution only puts the organism in a better fit to their environment. And so they match their environment better, but it does not generate the perfect organism. And so we'll see here in terms of form, we'll focus on the animal form in this chapter, looking at physical structures that help the animal in survival and reproduction, correlation of structure and function. So from small molecules to tissues and organs, their structure will always help and correlate with their function. And then usually we'll find that animal structures are often just good enough to function and not the ultimate design in terms of the best solution. And so let's take a look here at the overall big ideas. That we'll first see structure and function in animal tissues, organs and organ systems would be next, and then lastly, exchange and regulation with the environment and internal regulation. So structure and function in animal tissues is first. And we start out with an example of how the animal form is not perfect. And this example comes from the giraffe. Their laryngeal nerve is a very long nerve. It actually starts from the brain and then goes around the aorta in their chest. So that's, the blood vessel to the heart. And then it turns around and goes back up through the neck to the muscles in the throat. And so it makes a very long journey, about 15 feet, as the neck's about 7-ish feet long. And so you can see that here in this image, that the laryngeal nerve starts near the brain, then makes its way all the way down, goes to the aorta, loops around the aorta here, and it goes all the way back up. And so why would it do this, you may ask? And it comes from the origin, not from the output that you see here. And so to better explain that, we have a realistic life example of how this came about. That this life example shows you here there is a table with a lamp and then an outlet to plug the lamp in. So it started out that the lamp and the table existed close to the outlet, and so the lamp's cord went under the table to the outlet. And so, but moving that table and then corresponding lamp further away, so this in the giraffe's example would be that neck getting longer, that cord has to stretch out. And so the way to stretch out the cord is option 1, to unplug the cord and reassemble the cord and then plug it back in. But for a living organism, that would not allow for the organism to survive. And so that was not an option. And so the only other option is to make that cord longer. In terms of the giraffe, it just made that nerve cord longer. Instead of trying to reorient its position, it just extended it longer. So that way it could continue surviving and not try to unplug the cord, so to speak. And so that's what you see here. It's why it's so long, because it, like that lamp and the table, got wrapped around, so to speak, the table's legs, which would be the aorta here. And then, but to survive, it needed to stay plugged in, so to speak, as the neck grew longer. And so that just goes to show that not everything is made perfectly, but it's made to survive, which is a concept you'll want to understand. Let's see here. Let's do it brightly, slightly brighter, and I believe it's right here. Actually, this one right here, sorry. And so that brings us to our next topic, which is looking at structure and function together. So to study structure, you would study anatomy. Physiology is the study of function, and they're always correlated. And so in science major classes always include A&P, or anatomy and physiology. And so in anatomy and physiology, you look at how the structure matches the function of the different either organism, animal, or organ system, organ, or tissue. And so those are things we'll want to look at in terms of hierarchy of levels of organization. Tissues are defined as integrated groups of similar cells that perform a common function. So they all are similar cells working together for a function. Next, so multiple tissues come together to form organs. Organs will perform a very specific task and consist of at least 2 tissues. Usually more, or all 4 tissues can be found in an organ. And then organs join together to make up organ systems that will perform a vital body function. And so these things you'll want to be able to define. And so you can see a diagram example of that here. At the cellular level, we have muscle cells in this picture, and then multiple cells come together to form tissue, so that would be muscle tissue. And then multiple tissues come together, and our example here of the organ would be the heart. So the heart is made up of special muscle tissue called cardiac tissue. And it's also made up of nerves and connective tissue and epithelial tissue for the blood vessels. And so those are all different types of tissue. So organ has multiple tissues. Then the organ system level, here you can see the circulatory system performs the vital function of spreading of nutrients such as oxygen and food molecules. And then disposing or gathering of waste like carbon dioxide and other waste. Then the organism level, we have multiple organ systems coming together. So that completes the level of organization. And so this checkpoint question says, relate the idea of emergent properties to letters of the alphabet and a hierarchy of language. If you remember from one of the very first chapters, emergent properties are those properties that come together when, or form when things come together and work together. Like parts of the bicycle, when they're separated, they only have certain functions, but when you place them all together, now you have a new function of traveling on a bicycle. And so with the letters of the alphabet is the example here that they use. You have certain letters of the alphabet, and then when you put them together, they make words, and then from words put together, you can make sentences put together, you make paragraphs, and so forth. The more you get out of those letters when you put them together. And so the more we get out of organ systems when we put them together. Moving right along here, though, we'll look at tissues first. So tissues, remember, those group of cells working for a function, and they're going to make organs. And so we have 4 main types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Let's see. Let's get that for now. Epithelial tissues, or epithelia, they are Sheets of closely packed cells are going to cover surfaces or internal organs and cavities. And so they're found on the skin and hollow organs. And they're named, they're further classified by their cell shape and then the number of layers that they have. And so we'll see there are 3 cell shapes here. The first one is called squamous. So this is a flat tile-like cell. And so if you look from the side view, it's going to be very, very flat, but that nucleus is usually going to be pretty round and obvious, and it's going to actually jut out like that. And so this here would be the nucleus. And so it kind of looks, in certain cases from bird's eye view as well, you can kind of see that pretty well. And so it kind of looks like a fried egg. So I like to say that's our fried egg cell. And so simple squamous epithelium is flat, tile-like cell. And so simple means 1 layer. So there's 1 layer of flat cells there. And so if you see in this picture, they're found in the lungs, specifically on the branches called alveoli, where the gas exchange occurs. And so that allows for quick disbursement of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Looking at the second type of cell, you see here the cuboidal is the next one. Cuboidal in this example is also 1 layer, which is simple. And so here you can see most cuboidal cells are going to form ducts or glands. And so these are round and cube shape. And so their nucleus is usually in the center there. Then your simple columnar epithelium is next. This is the third type is columnar, and it looks like a rectangle or a brick on its side. Usually the nucleus is towards the bottom area. And that these are used for absorption. They're going to absorb things. And so you see the examples in the small intestine there is going to be responsible for absorbing nutrients. And then another example we see here, stratified squamous, shows you the different type in terms of layering. So simple is 1 layer, whereas stratified is multiple layers. And so this one here is multiple layers of the squamous cell. And so that's found there in the esophagus. But it is found also on our skin. We have any mouth region, any area where there's a lot of contact will have stratified cells. Depending on where they are, most of them will be squamous stratified. And so that's the epithelial tissues. You want to know the number of cell layers. Simple is 1 layer, stratified is multiple layers, and then the 3 shapes. The 3 shapes are squamous, cuboidal, and columnar, as well as just the general function of epithelial tissue. All right, so that brings us to our second tissue type, connective tissue, and they are further grouped into 6 major types, as connective tissue is the largest of all in terms of diversity. They have the most cell types in connective tissue. And so here you can see loose connective tissue is 1 group, fibrous connective tissue is another, adipose, cartilage, bone, and blood. And so all these will qualify as a connective tissue because they have cells that are suspended in some type of fluid. And so that's what unifies connective tissue, are cells suspended or with a type of fluid. And so it's a very vague classification for the reason of that connective tissue has a lot of different types that you see here. And so looking at our example, the first one there, loose connective tissue, is going to be under the skin, is going to tie the skin to underlying organs or to other tissues in place. In this example, you have loose connective tissue connecting the skin to some adipose tissue, which is fat. And so looking at the first function here, or first group of loose connective tissue, you can see its main function is binding to epithelial, so the skin, to underlying tissues, and also holding organs in place. And this is made up of a loose fiber material and a watery fluid. And so you can see that here in the image that it's loose connections. Compare that to your fibrous connective tissue, which is next. They are going to form tendons and ligaments. Tendons are going to connect muscle to bone, and ligaments will connect bone to bone. And so they're going to be condensely packed collagen fibers that they're made up of. So they need to be nice and strong to connect and keep those connections in place. Then you have your adipose tissue, your fat tissue. They will store fat in tightly packed cells. This is responsible for storing energy and insulating and padding the body. Interesting fact is that these cells will either shrink and swell. Their cell number usually does not change quickly. Usually the cells will either shrink the amount of fat that they have in their cell or add more. And so they don't usually add more cells, they will add just more to that cell, which is interesting, which also makes it difficult to lose weight. So bringing us to cartilage here. Cartilage is going to be known for its strong but flexible material, skeleton-like. It's going to be found, as we saw in different animals, in replacement of bone, essentially, which is, makes it a very strong material. And so for humans, it's found in our ears, our nose, at the ends of bones, in between vertebrae discs. And it has a very rubbery material. Looking at bone here, bone's going to be the strongest tissue in terms of structure and support, as it has fibers with hard minerals that are embedded. Calcium, phosphate, magnesium are the minerals that are found in bone. And so bone itself is a unique formation that they form these circular ring-like osteons are what they're called, these ring-like structures. And then at the center, they have an opening called the central canal that you can see there in that image, where transport nutrients will be found. And so at the center of a lot of bones will be blood marrow. This is where the blood cells will form. And so it's a very, very important process that is protected at the center in the bone. And so the blood itself is also connective tissue. It's responsible for transporting substances throughout the body. These substances are obviously gases of oxygen, carbon dioxide, also transport hormones and other signal materials. They're made up of red blood cells and white blood cells, along with a extracellular matrix, which is also known as plasma. It's a fluid substance that will maintain pH and other factors of water and other molecules. They have parts of cells, and those are called platelets, and that will aid in blood clotting. And so not next chapter, but I believe chapter 10, we'll look at the circulatory system, so we'll study this more. So that brings us to muscle tissue as we've wrapped up our connective tissue. And so muscle tissue is the most abundant in most animals. And there are three types of muscle tissue. Those are skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. So skeletal is known for voluntary movements. It's attached to bones to allow for us to move. Cardiac is found in the heart, responsible for pumping blood to and from the body. Smooth muscle is going to be found in the walls of internal organs, like the intestines, to help movement of the food and stool throughout the body. It's going to aid the digestive system in that example. And so here you can see those three types. Skeletal muscle, you can see they have what we call striations. Those are the color differences in the units of muscle contraction that you see here. Striations. So there's a dark line, a white line, and so it goes back and forth like that. And so these make up the protein units of actin and myosin make these fibers up. And so the fibers make up pretty much the whole entire cell, and so the nuclei get squished along the side there. And so the muscle cells are usually very large cells. Compare that to your cardiac muscle, which also has striations, but they have what you see here is labeled as junction between two cells. That is an intercalculated disc. Intercalculated can't spell, sorry, calculated disc. And so that allows for better, quicker communication between cell and cell. You can also see the nuclei are not flattened like they are in skeletal muscle, or at least not in this image. And then lastly, smooth muscle, it does not have the striations, so none. Just put S for short, no striations. And it is, those nuclei are much bigger and they're much skinnier, longer muscle cells. Right, and so that brings us to the fourth tissue type, nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is responsible for sensing stimuli from the environment and then rapidly transmitting information. And so they do that through two types of cells. Neurons will actually conduct the electrical impulse. And then there are other cells called glial cells. And glial cells will help in insulating those axons that are part of the neuron. They'll nourish neurons and then they'll regulate the fluid around neurons. So they essentially support and do everything else for the neuron cell, which is what you see here. So the neuron is made up of three parts. The dendrites will receive a signal. Then that signal transports down to the cell body, which then will generate a response and send that response out through that axon. So this will send out a signal. And so neurons can receive a response and then send out a response within either seconds or fraction of seconds. So it's very, very quick. And so some of these axons are very long, some of them are shorter. It kind of depends on which ones you're looking at and what part of the body. And so the long length of some axons, like those that extend from your lower spine to your toes, have a relation to their function, and that it allows for the transmission over a very long distance directly to specific cells. And so it's not like our hormone system where it goes throughout the whole entire circulatory fluid and then to the whole body. It will just transmit directly from one cell to another cell based on its location. So organs and organ systems will be our next thing that we've looked at tissues. And so in organs and organ systems, each tissue performs a very specific function, and then they are grouped together with other tissues that perform other functions, and together they usually add a new functioning to the organ. And so let's see, your example here is the small intestine. It is lined by the columnar cells. These will include connective tissue that will have blood vessels, and that will help with nutrient gathering. And so it also has layers of smooth muscle that help move food through the intestines. And so let's take a look at that here. So you can see in this image, oh, I need to undo. You can see in this image here that there are tiny little darkish yellow cells. Those are the columnar cells, and they're forming these projections called villi. And then those villi will help in getting food, absorbing nutrients from the food. That food will go through the cell and into the circulatory system that you see here is connected to, a different system, in which, if I'm remembering right, it is going to be connected to, in part to the lymphatic system, in part to the nervous system. Below that, there are smooth muscle layers that help move that food along. So all these tissues are working together for this organ, the small intestine organ. Alrighty. In terms of organs, there are lots and lots of scientific research. Bioengineers are looking to repair damaged tissue and organ. And there are from anywhere from using 3D printers to using other donated organs, to using organs from other animals, and then adding human cells to them, which is what you see here. This is the pig heart. It's the closest in size and functioning to the human heart. And so they have removed all of the cells that would correspond to cells in terms of epithelial cells, muscle cells. They've all been removed. And so what's left is connective tissue that's non-cellular. And so this is what we call a decellularized pig heart. And so now they're going to try to implement human cells onto that, forming human muscle tissue, human nervous tissue, and try to get that to function as a human heart. So there are many applications, nonetheless. So looking at organs, though, each organ will work together for organ system. Organ systems usually have many organs, one or more functions, and work together with other systems to make a functional organism. Let's see. And so which two organ systems are most directly involved in regulating all other systems? The nervous system and the endocrine system. So the nervous system consists of those neurons that will send and receive those nerve signals. And so they're responsible for a lot of regulation in terms of sending and directing signals, along with the endocrine system with hormones will also do the same thing. Just a lot slower. So here we'll now look at the different systems in humans and just overall name and what they do. So these are usually already well known, but you'll want to remember these for this chapter. And so I'll just circle them here. The circulatory system, as we know, will deliver oxygen and nutrients to body cells and moving carbon dioxide out. But it also generates metabolic waste that go to the kidneys where that produce urine. The circulatory system is closely tied to the respiratory system, which is responsible for exchanging those gases with the environment, moving in oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. They have the integumentary system, which is our skin. It protects against physical injury, infection, also helps with maintaining our body heat, so excessive heat or cold from the outer environment and from us drying out in terms of our soft inner body cells. Then next is our skeletal system that supports the body, allows for movement, protects organs. Our muscle system, which moves the body, maintains posture, also produces heat. Urinary system will remove waste from the blood by forming and excreting urine. It also regulates the makeup of blood, so maintaining pH and water balance. Balance is done by the urinary system. The digestive system, which is going to be our next chapter, we'll take a look at how it ingests, digests food, is what that's supposed to say, absorbing nutrients and eliminating undigested material. Their endocrine system is going to secrete hormones that regulate body activities and responsible for maintaining a normal state, and that's called homeostasis, and I believe we'll see that at the end of this chapter. They have the lymphatic system that returns excess body fluid back to the circulatory system and also functions in part of the immune system, which is here also defending against infections and cancer cells. So the lymphatic system is very important for maintaining good health with the immune system. Interesting enough, the lymphatic system, as you can see here, is made up of a bunch of vessels. Those vessels will move fluid because the muscle cells or muscle tissues are moving. So on its own, it's not going to be able to move the cells. It's not going to be able to move the fluid, and so it's relying on the muscle tissue to do so. And so when you're lying in bed at night, your lymphatic system is not transporting very quickly, and so that's why when you wake up, you can feel worse if you're already feeling bad, because that lymphatic system hasn't been able to transport very quickly. Looking at the nervous system here, it's going to coordinate all the body activities by detecting stimuli and understanding or integrating that information and then directing a response. Then you have the reproductive system that produces gametes and sex hormones. The female system also has components to develop the embryo and produce milk. And so after we've looked at the different systems, so we'll take a closer look at one of those systems, the integumentary system, and how it protects the body. So this system consists of skin, which is an organ, hair and nails, and it helps protect the animal from the environment. The skin itself is made up of two layers, the epidermis, which is the top layer, and then the dermis, which is below that. And so the epidermis is made up of stratified, so many layers of the flat-like cell, a squamous cell. And so for the epidermis, it has a fibrous protein called keratin that's going to fill up those cells, and so that protects against drying out, which also is done from a waterproof glycolipid. And so that's going to allow for protection against dehydration and infection from bacteria. Those cells on the top of the skin are going to actually be dead, and then will eventually be sloughed off or removed within 2 weeks. And so every 2 weeks to get a new cell layer on the skin. The dermis is the inner skin layer, and that is going to have dense connective tissue, and it's going to interlock and hold the top layer of skin in place, connecting it to other underlying organs. And so this dermis layer is going to have hair follicles, oil and sweat glands, some muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. And so you can see that here, the epidermis is the top layer, dermis is the bottom layer. And so through the dermis, such as hair follicles, will project through both layers, along with sweat pores. So blood vessel will run through and go to capillaries in the dermis of the skin. And so pinching that dermal layer, you're able to feel sensation. And so that's also here with the nerve cells. The nerve cells are going to reach into the lower part of the epidermis. So it can sense things quickly, changes in hair distribution, goosebumps can form. So we have very good detection of our layers here. From our different layers. So you can see the oil gland that's also being formed by the hair follicle, the sweat gland as well. So a bunch of different glands in the dermal layer. And so below the dermal layer, you can see some adipose tissue, and then that will then go further down to other organs like bone and muscle. And so looking at the system here of hair and nails, hair is going to be a flexible shaft of flattened keratin-filled cells and produced by hair follicle. They're usually connected to the nervous system, are responsible for trapping heat or a layer of air, and so that helps in insulating us. The oil glands are responsible for preventing bacterial growth and lubricating hair. And so looking at nails here, we have protective coverings also made up of keratin that will help with fine manipulation of our fingers. So the overall ideas here for hair, skin, and nails. Skin. You kind of want to know those here. Alrighty. In terms of scientific thinking and scientific questions for the skin, you might think about acne and how does that form? Well, it results from when hair follicles that also have oil glands become clogged with dead cells and oil, and so that forms is going to alert the immune system that this needs to be destroyed. And so to destroy that dead cell oil region, then you're going to have to recruit other cells to do so. What you can see here in this example of the acne forming, you have oil glands that are secreting, over-secreting, and so this is got the attention of some bacteria in this case. And so the bacteria will be detected by the circulatory system, the right white blood cells that function. Defense will come and gather and try to, by gathering, they're going to try to kill the bacteria. And so when they gather, they actually form an enlargement on the skin here, which is going to be what we know as usually the pimple. And so this white pus is actually white blood cells. that have gathered to destroy, in this case, the bacteria, or also dead cells, and as oil can generate a similar response. So that's just an example. It's not something you necessarily need to know. And so here you can see, in terms of testing, they've done some laser therapy testing that's shown here, and other laser therapy testing. All right, and so that brings us to the next section here, where we'll look at external exchange and internal regulation of animals in their environment. And so every organism is going to be what we call an open system that must exchange things with its surroundings. Animals that are small and flat can exchange materials directly with the environment, like we saw the flatworms and the hydra. But complex animals need very specialized internal structures that will perform the function for the whole organism. And so that exchange between the cells takes place through interstitial fluid. And so you can see that here, the exchange with the hydra, which is just 2 cell layers thick, is much easier, whereas the external environment, with the complex organism, they must have different systems to exchange different things with the external environment. So they have a digestive system to gather food and distribute nutrients throughout the whole organism, and then expel waste. Here they have to also have a respiratory system to exchange gas with the environment and then distribute to all the body, and then get rid of the waste. The circulatory systems are responsible for distributing nutrients to the whole environment, and then getting rid of waste in the other systems here. So any animal with a complex body must have those internal structures that will function as exchange surfaces. So we have multiple exchange surfaces here. One example is the lungs, with the alveoli are shown. These small little branches on the ends form little sacs called alveoli. And so those branch together to form bronchioles, and the bronchioles are formed together to form larger ones, eventually to lead to the 2 bronchioles here that lead to the trachea. But other examples are your small intestine is going to exchange nutrients with these rest of the body to the circulatory system, and then your kidneys also are responsible for exchanging nutrients, waste, forming waste for the body. So the structures of the lungs, small intestine, kidneys all function and exchange. Lungs for gas exchange, small intestine for nutrient exchange, and kidneys for metabolic waste exchange. Let's see. So animals will regulate their internal environment for most of them will have certain things that they regulate. Others will not regulate their conditions, such as your reptile animals. They don't regulate their own body temperature on their own. They need that environment, the warm sun or the cool shade, to help change your temperature. But most mechanisms are going to regulate their internal conditions and may result in much smaller changes in the animal's internal environment. And so this is called homeostasis. Homeostasis means, or translates to steady state, in which the body controls things like temperature, salt balance, water balance. We'll see in other examples like pH balance. And so to maintain a steady state, they must have a way to return the body back to that normal condition when it fluctuates out of the normal range. And so to do that, they have something called negative feedback. Negative feedback is going to reduce or reverse the change in the internal environment. Another type of feedback is positive feedback, where a stimulus or a change makes that change be amplified, and so that's not going to help with homeostasis. And so here you can see this example of a snowy owl. There's a large fluctuation in the temperature, external temperature, but due to their homeostasis, they're able to maintain their own internal temperature between 2 degrees Celsius there. And so homeostasis will focus or depend on a few things, one being negative feedback mechanisms, another being control systems to detect the change and then direct the response. And so those things can be shown in this example here. So here's the feedback control of body temperature. And that for homeostasis, the body temperature for humans is about 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And so let's just say this person has worked out, and so they're now, their temperature has risen above that set point, as generating heat causes the body to get warmer. And so this will be detected by the control center, the hypothalamus in the brain. Will detect that and then activate cooling mechanisms of sweat glands, or glands that secrete sweat. Will then that liquid evaporating will take heat with it. That will result in cooling the body. They will also dilate the blood vessels to increase heat loss. And so the overall result will be a temperature decrease, returning it back to normal there of homeostasis. And so the opposite can happen as well. Say person goes outside and the outside temperature is very, very cold. This is say 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so without insulation, that temperature is going to start falling. The hypothalamus will detect that change and then activate warming mechanisms of constricting blood vessels to minimize heat loss, and then contracting skeletal muscles of shivering that will generate heat to increase the temperature. And so here you can see negative feedback is what is occurring as it detects the stimulus, or the temperature here in terms of falling below the set point that is detected, and then results in something to prevent or combat that stimulus. And so that can be shown here in a short animation of negative feedback in terms of some enzymes here.
This simple animation illustrates the principle of negative feedback, or feedback inhibition, in the regulation of a chemical reaction sequence in a cell. The sequence involves 4 molecules, A, B, C, and D. 3 different enzymes catalyze the conversion of one molecule to the next. The final product, D, inhibits the first enzyme in the sequence. When the concentration of D rises to a certain point, the reaction shuts itself down.
And you can compare that to positive feedback in this one.
In positive feedback, a product of the reaction sequence enhances the action of one of the enzymes, increasing the rate of production of the product. Positive feedback is less common than negative feedback in living systems.
So now Z is making this whole thing go faster, which is not usually what happens in homeostasis. Whereas here, the production of D made this whole process and negative feedback stop. So that's some good examples in terms of enzyme production. So now we've hit the end of the chapter, then you should be able to. This is a great example here in terms of example in the structure and function of the different tissue types. And then this is part of that example. So it's not super helpful here. But overall, I find that most people understand this chapter pretty well, as these things have been addressed before in other classes. So let me know if you have any questions, but bye-bye for now.